Again, thank you so much for joining for the second of three discussions of Theology to Action, Caring for Creation. During this series, our expert speakers will share their works and insights towards today's ecological challenges and help us explore opportunities in the community and on an individual level to care for God's creation. This series was put together by the Care for Creation Committee in St. John's in Sacramento. The Care for Creation group out of St. John's has a ministry mission of, as a congregation and individuals, we live in just, harmonious, and nurturing relationship with God's creation. So for today's discussion, I am so honored to introduce our speaker, Ms. Karen Ross. Karen Ross is the Secretary of the California Department of Food and Agriculture and happens to be one of St. John's council members. Karen grew up on a farm in Western Nebraska, where her connection and love for the earth started at a young age with her involvement in 4-H. The farm still holds a place in her heart and life, as she and her husband Barry own 800 acres of the family farm that her brother tends to. She did graduate from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln and the Nebraska Ag Leadership Program. Early in her career, she started out in Nebraska working as a director of government relations for Nebraska Rural Electric Association. And then after moving to California, she served as many things, ranging from Vice President of Agriculture Council of California, President of the California Association of Wine Grape Growers, and then as Chief of Staff for the U.S. Agriculture Secretary, which has brought her all into her role today as the Secretary of California Department of Food and Agriculture. So with all of that, throughout her work in Nebraska and California on numerous boards and committees, both in public policy, nonprofit, and academics, Karen has strengthened partnerships across many platforms. She has initiated programs that provide greater opportunities for farmers and ranchers to engage in environmental stewardship through water conservation, energy efficiency, nutrient management, and ecosystem services. All of this to say that we really look forward to hearing from Karen as she shares what she and the state are working on and discuss what we can get involved in. We really want everyone to kind of interact and help navigate this conversation. As you can tell, Karen has lots of knowledge and background in all sorts of areas. So I am very happy on behalf of St. John and the Care for Creation Committee to present Karen Ross.
Holly, thank you. I always get so embarrassed when I hear myself described, but I'm going to share a story, and I'm really sorry that Libby Bullock's not on the screen today because it involves her son Cameron, who I taught in Sunday school for a number of years. Before my husband and I moved to Washington, D.C. 12 years ago for me to become chief of staff. And I was very emotional leaving the church at that time, thinking I was going to be gone for 8 years. And little did I know that Jerry Brown would get elected and asked me to be his Secretary of Agriculture. So I was back in town, back in church in less than a year and a half. And Cameron saw me that Sunday, and he said in his really adorable, gravelly voice, "What's the matter? Can't you keep a job?" So whenever my head gets too big, I'm always humbled and thankful for children who tell the truth. I had to share that story. So I'm going to start with just what keeps me motivated, inspired, and passionate about the work that I am so fortunate to do. I'm extremely grateful to have had the many opportunities that I've had. And it does go back, Holly, to the farm. You can tell Holly called me a few weeks ago to get a feel for where I was coming from. When you grow up in Western Nebraska, it is very isolated. It's very much, I tell people, in the middle of nowhere. Our farm is about 15 miles from the Wyoming border. And I grew up with just being part of a season, and Ecclesiastes has always been important to me everything under the sun and a time and a place for everything. Because when you grow up on a farm, you learn about faith through church and Sunday school and Bible school and confirmation classes, but also just living it, that you take great leaps of faith as a farmer to plant every year and to hope, and we're dryland farmers, which means we're rain fed. So if the rain doesn't come, it's not a very good year. But you plant and you care for that and you use the knowledge that you have. But at the end of the day, farming is about having great faith, of not knowing for sure what's going to happen through that season, not what's going to happen through the markets, but you're also so connected to the earth and the animals and the living species. And so I just did a bunch of videos and stuff for Earth Day. And I remembered what our speaker said last week about, wouldn't it be wonderful if each one of us lived each day like it's Earth Day? Because farming is, every day is about Earth Day. And so I feel very lucky to get to do the work that I do, to have grown up with a father who was just so interested in how things constantly be improved. His greatest friend on earth was our soil conservationist from the Natural Resource Conservation Service, to really continually learn about what are the best practices to build up soil health, to save the water that we do get, to hold it into those soils, and to go on farming. I still remember the year after my mom died. I was 14 when she died, and the following summer, the harvesters had pulled in July, and we are in Hail Belt Alley, and my dad stood on the porch and watched in 30 minutes the entire wheat crop completely wiped out. And yet, after a day of feeling sorry for himself, he got right back at it and went back to work. So that drives my work on the environmental side, but it's also very much connected to my dual passion, which is that every person has access to the best nourishment possible so that they can achieve their full potential. And we cannot make food available to all people if we don't take care of our earth. It's how we take care of our soil that will feed us and continue to feed us for generations and generations and generations. Farming is a very long-term business. Every farmer is always thinking about what I'm doing today and how can I hand it off to be in better shape for the next generation and all those that will come after me. And so those are my dual passions, and it was important for you to hear that when I start this, because they're both very, very, very connected. When I came back to the state of California, I had been inspired by the great work at the United States Department of Agriculture, which was just starting to do a lot of work on climate and agriculture. Now, California, we're all very fortunate to be in this state because we have done so much in the policy arena. And Elizabeth knows this better than anyone because she's now with the Energy Commission. But going back to when Jerry Brown was governor back in 1976 and throughout his first two terms, California did some pretty remarkable things with regard to energy conservation. We're still leaders in that. And we have this strong ethic on energy conservation, of energy efficiency standards for buildings, appliances, of renewable energy. And so a lot of the policy around energy, which is that is the direct nexus. How we use energy is a direct nexus to how we can prevent greenhouse gas emissions. And that's why it's so important as we do these shifts to a more renewable energy portfolio, as we have adopted low carbon fuel standards. As just this week, the governor announced a phase out on fracking that will happen over the next 3 to 4 years as we go through that regulatory process, knowing there'll be a few lawsuits. How we use energy is the direct nexus to climate. Before anyone was really talking about climate change in a meaningful way or in a tangible way that each one of us could see and feel and be a part in. One of the first things we did, starting with Governor Davis, a lot of these actions started as executive orders, but then the legislature picks them up and puts them into statutes, so they have very strong mandates and cannot be easily changed from one administration to the other. We started with an inventory of our greenhouse gas emissions, and then set goals and targets through the California Scoping Plan, which is a document that is updated every 5 years, and all of 2021 will be many, many workshops, many, many hearings, and many, many opportunities for all of us as individuals and through our organizations to be able to weigh in on where we think the next set of targets and the next set of goals could be. It's a very important living document that activates us across cabinet to have multiple interagency. We have a climate action team that's made up of all agencies as a way of holding ourselves accountable on the progress that we're making and the implementation of that. But the scoping plan is a hugely important document for us. We also do, and I think this coming year, and Elizabeth helped me on this one, I think it'll be our 6th climate assessment at a state level. There's also national climate assessments that really takes a look back at the progress we've made, what has moved the needle and what hasn't, but also looking forward. And it's frightening in each assessment how much impact we've seen climate have on our resources, whether it's drought or wildfires or other situations. It's a hugely important document to tell us where we are, but also trying to look forward to where we need to be. And there have been a couple of changes, and this is where agriculture is going to come in. Agriculture in the state of California is approximately 8% of the total greenhouse gas emissions. That's a relatively small percentage. On a global basis, agricultural emissions are much larger, and there's a couple reasons for that. One is less efficient farming. 2 is, unfortunately, because we all love to consume products from around the world and it drives change on the landscape, we are doing way too much slash and burn agriculture, going in to take out natural forests for planting crops on a large scale, especially in countries like Brazil, which has become a major producer of some of the same crops that we do, whether it's soybeans or corn or whatever it is. Going into tropical forests and planting crops. And animal agriculture is one of the more significant contributors to climate change, primarily because of the methane issue. Methane gas is a short-lived climate pollutant that has much more impact on a short-term basis. And animals, especially ruminant animals, which cattle are, it gets dinged for a lot of those greenhouse gas emissions. But there's a reason we have so many cows on the land. Of all the arable land on the globe, the vast majority is not suitable for growing crops on other types of food crops. It is suitable, and many, many natives on a number of continents are herds people. They herd cattle in particular. It's a significant part of how they make their living. 98% of the world's farmers grow less than 20 acres of crops. It is for subsistence. I remember my first few trips to Africa, they all admired the United States because they wanted to know, how do you grow enough food for your family and still have just a little bit to sell to help make a living? So that's why one of my favorite nonprofits is Heifer International. It's about the difference one cow or one goat or one beehive can make for a family as something that continually gives them food to eat as well as products to sell. And so that's at a global basis, greenhouse gas emissions are almost 25% as opposed to California that's 8%. So when I came back, I used this obscure statute to create our Office of Environmental Farming and Innovation. And the first climate smart ag program that we had was in response to the drought in 2014. And that is our on-farm water use efficiency and energy reduction program that was created and funded with the funds that we raised through our cap and trade auction, which is a whole nother topic for discussion because some people love it, some people hate it. But it generates dollars by putting caps on emissions. We've also set up offsets that can be purchased, and the purchase of those offsets are then reinvested in transitioning the California economy to a low carbon economy, except that now our goal by 2045 is to be a zero carbon economy. And that takes huge investment to make these kinds of switches, to get to 100% renewable, to get to complete net zero carbon emissions is where agriculture and forestry come in. Our natural and working lands can be stewarded in a way to draw down carbon, hold it in our soils, hold it in our root system, hold it in our old growth forests, so that we are actually absorbing the carbon emissions. And when we absorb that into our soils, we're helping to create microbial action that actually lets us improve our water holding capacity, improve nutrient cycling so that we're not getting nitrates into our groundwater, and to become resilient to drought and climate over time. The way we do that are multiple ways. One is to transition to minimal tillage on the land so that we always have ground cover. Two is to plant more cover crops. Three is to add compost or mulching. One is to plant more trees on pasture. Another is to plant hedgerows, which also become pollinator habitat. There are so many options for us to be able to do these multiple benefits to improve the way that we can fight climate and become environmental stewards. And one of the reasons we're investing in climate smart agriculture is because of those opportunities. Food supply more sustainable over the long term. So we fund programs for soil health. We fund programs for on-farm water use efficiency and energy reduction. We fund programs with our dairy families for either dairy digesters that are creating renewable electricity, renewable natural gas, or low carbon fuels, all by turning that manure. I always talk about cow poop when I give a speech, by turning that into that biomass being converted into renewable energy. We also fund alternative manure management programs for those small farmers who want to turn that into compost or other useful products. We also have programs at the Air Board that are helping farmers with the tremendous cost of replacing their equipment and their engines to be cleaner burning. You know, we hope to have all electricity powered harvesters in the future, but we're a couple of decades away from that. We have funded programs at the Energy Commission to improve the energy efficiency of our food processing sector. So it's this idea that we can reinvest in transitioning our economy, which we're doing across all scales, that has been made possible by the Cap and Trade program. So those are just a few of the programs I wanted to talk about. But one of the hi, Kitty. One of the programs I really wanted to focus on is how we have embedded equity throughout all of our programs, because pollution disproportionately impacts many of our communities of color and our poorest communities. If you think about where we have the most warehousing and all those big trucks, or you think about being in the proximity of ports and all that heavy duty equipment that's powered by fossil fuels, when you think about where refineries are sited, when you think about where heavy duty manufacturing and some of our most toxic landfill issues are, they tend to be in some of our poorest communities and communities of color. So we have focused and we have kept equity as a center of the policy work that we're doing and the investment work that we're doing to ensure that we're making sure that dollars are being invested in those communities, and that we're now thinking more in a holistic way about our land use planning and really thinking that through. When we build affordable housing, are we helping to create communities where we're closer to work? Are we making them walkable? Are we making sure that they have access to healthy food, whether it's a traditional grocery store, community gardens, or whatever it is? Those programs are happening through the Strategic Growth Council, and they're hugely important to us. The last program I wanted to mention for us is our Farmer Equity Program. We issued a report 3 years ago to really understand the issues for our state's smallest farmers and our farmers of color, and to really focus some of our programs on that. We also are participating in a state government process to really understand institutional racism and bias, and how we can ensure that across all of government, we are facing that directly on. We're training ourselves and sharing that knowledge with all of our folks, so that as we go out into communities, we've got this new lens of thinking, is everyone in this room that needs to have a voice here? Are we doing everything we possibly can to reach into the communities that traditionally don't have voices? What are we doing to ensure that all of our programs, but especially our climate programs, keep equity as a lens for that? And I'm really proud of our staff. This is the first year for us. It's, I think, the third year of this program, but it is hugely energizing and empowering to have such a diversity of people come together to do this work together. I call my CDFA employees our pioneers, because they're going to come back and teach each one of us and train the trainer and equip us, because sometimes to go out into public meetings, it's hard. And sometimes we simply don't know how to have the conversations in the most constructive way. We are making huge investments in our community-based organizations. We've done a lot of work during COVID to make sure we're helping to build capacity within these very impacted communities, to make sure that they have the training, the skills, whether it's to write grants or to organize and be advocates for their own community. These are all part of what we're doing across state government. And I think under this new administration, we'll see more of those kinds of programs happening all across the nation. But the investments that we've made in California agriculture are truly moving the needle on reducing our own greenhouse gas emissions. And as we really do this next round of the scoping plan and focus on natural working lands, I think you'll see very aggressive goals and targets for how we partner with our private landowners, as well as on our publicly owned lands, to really think about being a solution to draw down carbon, to really focus on biodiversity and saving biodiversity. The governor has a 30 by 30 goal, saving 30% of our land mass, 30% of our coastal waters by the year 2030, to really save the richness of biodiversity that we have here in California, and make sure that we're doing all that we can for sustainability, for resilience, and for fighting climate. I hope that was just a snapshot of things, hopefully not too confusing, because there's so much to talk about, but I'm happy to talk about our food access programs that we do through our farm to school program, our senior farmers market program, as well as it's such powerful, exciting work. I tell young people whenever I have the opportunity to meet with them, I'm so jealous. I wish I were 20 years younger so I could be involved in really the remarkable work that's going to happen. And they are holding us accountable to make sure that we do it. That's the exciting part about having these kinds of conversations in our church, to see how we as a church talk about these things together, that we as individuals think about how we use energy, how we shop, the choices that we make actually do make a difference, but also how we can raise our voices in these opportunities of advocacy, to be truly informed part of the civic discussion that also has to happen to make these policies real. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Holly. I hope I get lots of questions and challenges. And I know Rebecca's ready. She told me already.
Well, thank you. I think that was a great overview. I have so many questions, but I think I'll go ahead. I know Karen, I see your hand up. So I will hand it over to her, and then maybe I'll ask my question after that. Karen, you're muted.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Holly. Karen, thank you so much. I'm really happy that you shared with us about your passions, because it's obviously obvious that comes through in your work. And we're so fortunate to have you at the helm. Thank you for all the innovative work that you're doing. And I loved hearing about your connection with the earth. and the earth cycles. And having been a public health professional, I was really happy to hear about your inclusion of equity. And you touched on how that kind of rolls out through, for example, the Strategic Growth Council and the Farm Equity Program. But I was wondering, having been at the local level, I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about how that looks at the local level, because I know like often the state works through grants to the counties, to CBOs. So I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how those programs are dispersed through to the local level, how they roll out at the local level.
Sure. They are, and this is why capacity building is so important, Karen, and in the public health field, you know that. Oftentimes, we saw this in our specialty crop block grant program, which is actually funded through the Farm Bill. We saw over time that we were getting proposals, but they didn't score well. And unfortunately, when you have a small pot of money, it's usually competitive. So about 5 years ago, I was just so frustrated with it. And I like, isn't there something we can do to just carve out some money to actually invest in helping them improve this particular grant proposal to make it more competitive? And so through that program, that's one that really taught us that if we could just put a small amount available for technical assistance, which is the magic sauce for us, incentive grants and technical assistance are the way we can really get everybody involved. I say every acre should be under some sort of climate program. But that's what we've done is like use part of our dollars that we get from every one of these programs is made available for technical assistance. And then I also have a new committee for us that came out of our farm equity report. And it's a committee of small, historically underserved farmers. Most of them are farmers of color. Some are urban farmers, which is an important area for us to invest in. And so they're helping to guide a new program that we just got funded this year, which is a technical assistance program to help farmers in the recovery from COVID, because so many of them were not able to access USDA programs. It's tremendous amount of paperwork and a lot of documentation they don't necessarily have. So that is a specific program that the governor put in early action for $3.6 million. And it will have a mini grant program to those small farmers, and mostly farmers of color, as well as continuing. The other thing we're doing is tremendous amount of technical assistance that's done through CARB and the Strategic Growth Council. And actually it's the Strategic Growth Council that had the first capital cohort on race and equity, this training program that I was talking about. And so they've done tremendous work through transformative climate communities, which is really bringing full communities together to do that visioning and that hard work of how do we want this particular impoverished area to look in a decade? And why should we be the ones that get the first, $5 million grant or $10 million grant to do that work? And just going through that kind of a process to bring all those voices together has led to people getting other funding, even if they didn't get it through the Strategic Growth Council. One of the important areas that often gets overlooked is how many food deserts we have in urban areas and in rural communities. And so that's where a lot of our work has been really focused on, whether it's mobile food truck, whether it's through food banks having more opportunities to get food to those areas, or if it's investing in just refrigeration so that the corner liquor store, and many of them have transformed, also has refrigeration capacity for more fresh produce to be able to, that's such an important part of healthy diets. So those are just a few examples, but I think our technical assistance grants are some of the most important ones that we do, whether it's to those CBOs or in others that are helping to build up their capacity. That's just, the imbalance of being able to do that kind of historical catch up, not ketchup that you put on, catch up, to be able to be empowered to raise your voice and to be effective in doing it. Yeah.
Great, thank you. That was really helpful. And I know that technical assistance is really important and on an ongoing basis. So it's great that you're approaching that from so many areas and truly integrating it. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we've learned a lot during the pandemic about these inequities, and I think it will change us for the good, actually. There are good things that have come out of this, and this area of really infusing these communities is one of the best ones. Come on, Rebecca.
Well, I do in the chat, we've had some input from going back to your mention of the 30 by 30. It does, some of the questions I know Melanie and both Elizabeth had shared, it sounds like a wonderful goal and really is a great start in the right direction. But two questions from that is, one, do we think that 30% is enough? And two, what are some of the challenges that you kind of anticipate with even targeting that 30%?
Even setting those targets. I think one of the things we've seen over the decades, there's really been a huge transition in thinking, especially on the part of a lot of the conservation organizations that used to think that we'll just acquire all this land and we'll make everything we want happen. And the realization that over 50% of the land mass in this country, I'm only speaking about the United States right now, that over 50% of the land mass in this country is actually held by private landowners. And so as conservation movement has matured, there have been many more partnerships that have been built. Some of the early leaders in that were like Audubon or Ducks Unlimited, Pheasants Forever. Obviously, our resource conservation districts have always been a bridge in that, but then Environmental Defense has done amazing groundbreaking work in this regard. The Nature Conservancy, a state environmental organization that I adore is Sustainable Conservation. And it's not just because they have a brilliant CEO and she's one of my best friends who serves on the State Board of Food and Ag, but they are a San Francisco-based conservation and environmental organization that 15 years ago wanted to tackle a vexing problem in the valley, and it was dairies, both with their water quality issues and their greenhouse gas issues. And they have partnered, and they have found out that that partnership has helped them reach their goals faster in a more cost-efficient way if there's some incentive dollars and some technical assistance to help make it happen. So really using Farm Bill conservation title, which co-invests, it's a cost share with farmers. And what those incentive dollars do is really help take some of the risk out of farming of, if I make this change in my farming practice, will I still be productive? Because a lot of these practices cost more than they return in money, but that's that ethic of farmers of knowing the land will be better off. So those incentive dollars are really, really important. And that's one of the ways of doing it. I say all this because setting a 30 by 30 goal in this state, it's important that California does it. And among all the other things that we have the richest biodiversity. We're actually a biodiversity hotspot on Earth, partly because we have this beautiful, diverse landscape with all of its microclimates, 2,500 different soil types. You can go from the highest to the lowest. We have high desert and we have almost rainforest up in Humboldt County, but that's what gives us our biodiversity. We have few species in the state that have gone extinct. Obviously, we want to prevent that. We want to make sure that we're saving the right spots that do need to be completely protected, because there's few spots in California that we can save as pristine. We know all kinds of things have happened, but how do we make sure we're saving the wetlands that need to be saved to be a part of that, having that continuous opportunity for the Pacific flyway birds? That's where our rice farms come in as a man-made wetland every winter. They now host, because they stop burning and flood their rice fields, 233 bird species use our rice fields in the wintertime as their hotel and restaurant stopping place. It's pretty exciting to do that kind of work. The work we're doing now on pollinator health, we just launched a California pollinator partnership that has enough ag organizations and conservation organizations to represent about 90% of the ag lands, both rangeland and cropland, to really focus on having forage, preventing any type of pesticide drift, and really focusing on pollinator health. And so those initiatives, in addition to what we're doing on our public lands, we believe can get us there. And what's really exciting is that the Biden administration has also announced its commitment to 30 by 30. And all of this leads up to the International Biodiversity Conference. It's an international conference that would be held in China later this year, where many other nations are also committed to this. It's important for us to do this work. It's also important that we make sure that we have a global action plan to do this. And that's what that's designed to do. Sorry, I give long-winded answers. You can tell I've been in politics too long. I'm so sorry. I get so
No, I think
excited about this. I lose myself. I'm sorry.
No, that was great. I think one of the other questions that came through as you're talking about the importance of pollinators and these birds and other animals, have we been taking, with the combination of our impact on those creatures and the warming or extreme weather,
Yes.
We bring forth this potential for more crop pests or diseases. So are we taking, how are we trying to adapt to some of those changes throughout this also?
That is a great question, because one of the core functions that the Department of Food and Agriculture does is centered around excluding, to the best that we can, invasive pests and exotic animal diseases. And I think COVID, again, is a reminder of One Health, how easily zoonotic disease can jump from an animal species to a human species. And that's a big part of the work that we do. We have border stations to try to keep invasives out. We have, detector dogs, because a lot of shipments happen that are bringing invasive pests and plants and smuggled meat products into the state. So that's a big part of the work that we do is excluding that. And we focus on integrated pest management, which is really thinking about doing a bug count to understand what on the farm, what the economic threshold is before you just treat. Like, we're trying to get people to not use a pesticide because the calendar says to do it, but to be in the field, to have those scouts, to know what the bug count is. We do this as master gardeners as well. And then use the least invasive mechanism first. Sometimes that's just stripping the fruit from a tree where we know we've got exotic fruit flies. But trying to use the softest approach first, biocontrol, that pesticides do need to be used. And the sooner we can knock down a pest population that isn't invasive, the less pesticides will be used, because all of a sudden they're everywhere. My favorite program, I used to say, if I wanted the attention of Governor Brown, all I had to do was go into the office and yell, "Fruit fly," because he swears the reason he was never president is because of how he handled the first Mediterranean fruit fly infestation. And that was 30 plus years ago. And what we have developed, instead of doing malathion being dropped from helicopters over Los Angeles at nighttime, we now send up planes that are releasing sterile fruit flies. And that sterile fruit fly keeps any potential breeding population that might be there from its birth control for pets. And so that's one of my favorite biocontrol programs. And so one of the first things we try to do when we do have something that seems that it is kind of now embedded in the society is try to come up with a biocontrol mechanism like that. We've done that for a really serious cotton pest. We're doing that under a number of pests. And the whole idea of sterile insect technology, I did a really exciting forum earlier this year. And this is the combination of bringing science together to identify, where's this species coming from? What is the natural predator bug for that? We do that for the Pierce's disease program and glass-ring sharpshooters. We've identified some of those predatory wasps that are doing that in the Asian citrus psyllid, which could wipe out all of our citrus industry if it becomes embedded. So those are some of the things that we're doing to really minimize the impact of the pesticide use in the state, because we grow so many different crops. And climate change is already, we see our pest seasons are lasting longer. We don't get the chill hours to wipe out some of them that might be coming in. And they're coming from places we never even anticipated before. So climate change is, we're living that on the farm already in many, many ways.
Wow, all of that sounds so interesting.
It's
I was,
fascinating. And
I
guess
was,
what? I'm an English major. I don't understand the science at all, but I value science and what my scientists do on a daily basis.
I started thinking if there were other pests that we could provide sterile versions of to try to start getting those out of there.
Yeah, exactly. I think they're working on that in Florida on some mosquito abatement programs, trying to figure that out. And especially because of the Zika virus. Remember a couple of years ago, Karen Olson is from Public Health. We were so fearful of that coming into this. So they really have started doing some work in that space. Yeah.
That's so interesting.
I'm so lucky to do what I do.
It's really eye-opening to think about and hear all of the very different avenues that we are going down. Sometimes when we are trying to address some of these things,
Yeah.
our solutions seemed very black and white. And so it's fantastic to hear that we're really looking at all sorts of different avenues.
Yeah, it's really important. Yeah.
One of the questions that Nancy brought up is, you mentioned during this some of the technology encouragement and how we're trying to help use technology to provide alternative solutions. Do you think that it is going to be able to convert tractors and some of our other maintenance equipment into a zero emission type?
Yeah. Well, I remember the day the governor announced that he wanted to include heavy duty equipment in the zero emission goal by 2035. It was in the middle of rice harvest, and it was right after a summer of rolling blackouts. And my rice growers called and said, do you know the torque I have on this harvester, and there's not an extension cord long enough to run my harvester? And can you keep the electricity on if I do that? It's a very good question. And I will just say, not setting goals does not give the policy signal. That's a lot of what we do in government. We can't solve all this. It does take the private sector and each one of us as individuals. So setting the right policy goals is a signal to the marketplace, to the innovators, to the researchers that this is a space to go. And when I look at how rapidly a number of car companies who started out fighting our emissions goals have now made sure that they've got a line of electric vehicles and they're totally into it. Obviously, the heavy duty equipment that we use in our fields is going to be a challenge, but there's so much work going on in this space, and there's a lot of smaller scale tractors that are actually now available. The storage issue is going to be the most important piece of this, I think, to really bring that to fruition. And so the work is happening. Whether we'll be there by 2035, we'll see. But so much in science, just look at how quickly we had vaccines. I mean, usually that would have been at least 5 years, and there was technology and the focus and the signals were in place. I think it's possible. And my goal, because of the lousy broadband connectivity we have in rural areas, is that each one of them will be their own broadband signal so they can get all that data that they're collecting on their tractor on top of it at the same time. Be multi-benefit, right?
Yeah, I think, I work in a private sector, but I've also, my history and work is trying to convert some heavy duty diesel equipment and stuff into all sorts of things. And so I think that makes sense. We have you guys set.
Yeah, that's good to know. Yeah, and that's the cool thing about if we stop thinking about waste as waste, get it out and just go, there's a byproduct that comes from this process. How can we convert that and repurpose that? And that's where biomass for low carbon fuels, bio-based fuels are a great transition on our road to all electric. And so that's going to be a piece of the transition puzzle as well. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I just want to add, coming from the Energy Commission, we also have grants and loans that we fund collaboratives on the research and development of these heavy duty and mid-sized vehicles that are used in agricultural communities. We even, you mentioned methane, we do methane capture at landfills.
Yep.
And so they become self-supporting in their energy system. So lot of pilots going on because we live in such
Yeah.
a great state. With that, I have a quick question. You I've been blessed to follow some of your travels, and we're doing great things in this state. And like I said, I've got like a page of notes already that I've learned just from you today. But has there been in your travels some inspiring, innovative and inventive things that you've seen, based on that community's challenges and what was working for them that inspired you?
Yeah. The first, I take, well, in the good old days when we traveled, I took delegations of farmers to other countries for climate smart ag exchanges, and we then execute MOUs and work together collaborative on webinars and stuff. The first one was to the Netherlands, which, is a small country, but it's very important agricultural country. And what they do with greenhouse technology is incredible. I mean, it is incredible. And Elizabeth, especially, that was the first place I saw them really experimenting with LED lighting and blue lights and red lights and green lights and all these kinds of things. And there's more and more food crops of even larger scale. They're even starting to experiment with berries and some tree crops that I thought would never be indoors. That was from that trip. The third trip I did was to Israel, which for me was so impactful on so many fronts, but especially from just like to be in Israel, which brought me back to just in the Bible, the references, because everything was about agriculture and just feeding ourselves and taking care of animals and being shepherds. But spending time at their Desert Research Institute and the importance of roots and really understanding that was where solutions to climate would be, as well as feeding themselves, and to learn how to use every drop of water as precisely and carefully as possible. And driving in the desert and seeing camels and purple pipe of recycled water going to all these communities was just, it was the most amazing, amazing thing. I've always had a love affair with Africa, in which I could see every country on that continent. And visiting a farming community that was actually sponsored by an international environmental organization with women farmers. The vast majority of these small landholders on the globe who are farmers are women, and their lot in life is hard. But these women coming together and having the advantage of not being on the chemical wheel, who were doing organic farming and just, I mean, I couldn't get my guys back into the bus because we were having so much fun hearing their ideas, and this was going to be how they were going to get their family out of crime-ridden shanty towns. I mean, it was just the work itself, and there was nothing tech about it. It was about that spirit and bringing people together from unusual places, and the large-scale landowners dedicating land for this kind of work to happen. Those are just a few that I can think of that just meant the world to me. It re-inspires me every day. Yeah. I have a question here about drought, since we said we're in a drought last week. We have an emergency drought in other places. Fallowing is the way that farmers handle drought. And that's one of the challenges we have now, is how many more acres are in tree crops, because that's where the smartest economic return comes from, is really using that water for crops that are not easily grown in other states or countries. And that's where California has the advantage of being 99% of the world's tree nuts and 50% of the country's fresh produce, and really focusing on the higher value crops. So over the 3 decades, when we used to have almost 2 million acres of cotton, and now it's less than 250,000 acres, but we used to have only 200,000 acres of almonds and other tree nuts, and now that's over 1.5 million acres. But they use very precise watering methods, but now they're going to leave fields fallow to be able to save those crops. So fallowing is one way. Healthy soils provides a unique opportunity when you have water, the ability to improve the organic matter in your soils, creates that microbial activity so that you have better holding capacity for resilience, and storing water underground. Our capacity to store water underground, our surface water storage capacity is about 42 million acre feet. Underground storage capacity is about 400 million acre feet. So really change our thinking about how do we capture peak flows from these atmospheric river storms that happen to get that water underground, so that then we could pump it up when we need it, because groundwater should be the savings account, not what we depend on every day.
Yeah. One of the questions in regards to that is fog collection through mesh netting a possibility for some areas of California?
That's an interesting question, and one, I'm not sure how much work has really been happening on it. One of the sad things about climate change is how many fewer heavy fog days we have, especially in the Central Valley, where it used to be, every winter you could count on the month of February being, all those trips to the valley were scary times because of the heavy fog. It just rarely happens in the Central Valley. And even we've seen some of that lessening even on our coast, and that's a direct result of climate change. So I don't have a lot of information about that, Stephanie, but thank you for that question.
I know as we're talking about a lot of these things, I think one of the questions that a handful of us have are, what are some immediate things that we as individuals or even as a congregation can take part in and start doing in our daily lives to help?
Yeah. Well, I see a lot of this now is more walking and biking, obviously, and really at the local level, making sure that we're encouraging that, and we're welcoming, and we're improving the safety of doing that. Because quite truthfully, the way some people drive, it's pretty scary to be on a bike or to be walking. Very, very important. How we shop is really important, whether it's our clothing. Like my dream is that we're all a bio-based economy with natural fibers, where farming can be a piece of that. But whether it's that or things that are plastic-based, plastics obviously are a huge issue, not only because of how they're manufactured, but just where they end up. And so really trying to think through making sure we've got stuff that's truly biodegradable and really looking for that. And then, of course, there's the food basket. So let's talk about meat. My friend Kat Taylor from Tomcat Ranch likes to say, you don't have to eat it, but we have to have animals on the land. And it's really about the grazing practices. My brother does dryland farming. He does cover cropping so that he never has bare ground. He does zero tillage, and he changed his entire beef cattle production to be around rotational grazing, where you're constantly moving the fence and keeping them on a small acreage for about 20 to 30 days as a way to keep that rotational, so that their waste stream is being worked into the ground as a natural nutrient. And so I like to tell people it's okay to eat meat, but I don't know that we need to have the serving sizes that we have as often as we do it. And I say that very respectfully, because my father thought he could eat beef 3 times a day, and that would be just fine. And he loved feeding cattle and caring for cattle. The care for his cattle. It's a matter of resources and how we use the resources that we have, and thinking through that. And just working with our young people. And we see that every day. Their environmental ethic is there. They have a strong stance, especially millennials, because this has connected them to the globe. They are citizens of the globe, and they have a consciousness about that, and making sure that they have good information, and that we're helping them to understand these kinds of things as well. And then thinking through, to the extent that we have an extra dollar, the kinds of organizations that we want to support for those who don't have the same access that we do, are just a few of the things that I think about.
Well, thank you. I mean, I think that hopefully that gives all of us, some things to think about and try to implement into our daily practices.
Yeah, and Holly, just because of the work that you do and Mark does, don't be afraid to be an advocate, whether it's at the state level or at the local level.
Thank you. I think we, especially the Care for Creation, we want to not only be advocates, but also encourage others. So thank you. And trust me, we will probably be reaching out to you for some of those avenues in the future.
That's great.
Unfortunately, we are coming to the end of our time. So I think that we'll kind of end on some of those thoughts, but I do want to close us out with a prayer. So First, Karen, thank you so much. Really enjoyed this discussion and look forward to some more future opportunities.
Stay in touch.
Yes. And now I'll ask everyone to join me in a prayer as we close. Abundant God, we give you thanks for the fruitful earth, which produces what is needed for life. Bless those who work in the field. Grant favorable weather to all those who engage in agriculture, and help us to ensure that all people share the fruits of the earth, rejoicing in your goodness. Through your Son, Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen.
Thank you for having me.